Good evening and welcome to this week's worldwide broadcast of The Joyner Report. Now here's your host, Angela Joyner.
Hello and welcome to The Joyner Report at WPRN-FM New Orleans and at www.UFOParanormalRadioNetwork.com. I'm glad to see everybody gathering in the Pal Talk chat room. It looks like we got about 35 people there. Last week we had 61. I hope we're going to pick that up a little bit, so get on Facebook or wherever you can and tell your friends to come on over. Tonight's guests are Grant Camron of presidentialufo.com, and most of my listeners are very familiar with Grant. He does a lot of research on presidents and what they may or may not know about the UFO field. And the main guest tonight is Mike Lukmen, and he's the director of the New York Center for Extraterrestrial Research. And he also has a book called Alien Rock. And I thought this was real interesting. It's a book about rock stars, very well-known famous rock stars like Mick Jagger, David Bowie, Jerry Garcia, Elvis Presley, lots of others. And their beliefs about the extraterrestrial phenomenon or UFOs. So I didn't really know any of those stories, so I found that quite interesting. Mike also led the first ever UFO demonstration at the United Nations, and he broke the story of billionaire philanthropist Lawrence Rockefeller's initiative with the Clinton White House aimed at opening the United States government's X-Files on UFOs. So hi, Mike. Welcome to the show, and welcome, Grant.
Glad to be with you, Angela.
Nice to meet you here.
Well, I appreciate you both being on, and actually Grant is the one that tuned me into you, Mike. I'm sorry to say I haven't read your book, but I have read some of the reviews of it, and I know that you've been making the news a lot lately with the anniversary of Elvis's death. Is that right?
Absolutely. AOL News broke a story that went worldwide and literally been picked up by thousands of websites, even as far as in China.
Well, you know, I have a Google alert for UFOs, and for the last few days, daily, something is coming up that relates to your book and usually Elvis, I think. But
yes.
Why don't you tell us a little, why do you think that happened? I mean, how long has the book been out?
Well, actually, the book came out. Now, the impression that you get in the story is that the book just came out, but in reality, the book came out 4 years ago, but it's still making news. And it's obvious that the reason for that is all of the celebrities, well-known celebrities and rock stars who were throughout the book. As you said, these are people who are not just rock stars, but they're, you know, really the main, the key rock icons, from Elvis to Jimi Hendrix, David Bowie, the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and Jerry Garcia of the Grateful Dead, and many, many more. There are about 10 rock stars in there who relate their experiences, which they believe were essentially UFO abduction experiences, including Jerry Garcia. So there's lots in the book. But of all the things in the book, of course, the AOL picked up the story because of the anniversary of Elvis's passing this week, which is observed in Memphis, where thousands of people, tens of thousands of people most likely, show up at Graceland and parade through in a silent candlelight procession. So that was why they picked up now. But of all the rock stars, Elvis had the most direct relationship with UFOs. In fact, I'm hard-pressed to think of anybody else except for Robbie Williams, who's a British pop star, the number one British pop star, and extremely well known in Europe, but not so well known in the United States. And he's been extremely immersed in this subject. So Elvis is gone, but Robbie, carries on. The interesting thing about Elvis is that it all started when, according to his dad, Vernon Presley, there was a strange blue light that was seen over their house in small two-room shack in Tupelo, Mississippi, where Elvis was born. And that was seen by both Vernon Presley, his father, as well as the attending physician. And I've referred to in my book, Alien Rock, as rock and roll's own Star of Bethlehem, because that light was truly there. It's just an amazing occurrence. And we know, and I relate this to my book, that Elvis had many UFO experiences. It went much deeper than just in believing in extraterrestrials, but rather he had first-hand experiences. Now, according to one account of a woman who was very, very close to him, he may have seen beings of light that communicated to him when he was only 7 or 8 years old, and those beings showed him what amounts to a little film of a man in a white jumpsuit. He had no idea who that was, and of course he was to play that role in the future. Moreover, Elvis, and this according to his bodyguards, and more than one bodyguard has attested to this, had multiple sightings of UFOs, even a sighting in the desert of a mother ship, and came to believe that basically they were benevolent and here to help us. Now, I think what's interesting also is that at the end of his career, or right before his death anyway, he was really planning to do a lot of things that would have changed or could have changed the course of history and not only his career. He was basically prepared to put his career on hold and to lead a peace effort in the Mideast to help bring peace between Israel and its Arab neighbors. He felt very strongly about this. He was planning on going down to Hawaii, drying out, and being weaned off of drugs. Larry Geller, who's a good friend of mine, and Larry was Elvis's best friend and a spiritual mentor, as well as Elvis's hairstylist. That's how they met. Larry lived in Graceland, and he has helped Elvis assemble a library of about 350 books on metaphysical, paranormal, and UFO subjects. This made Colonel Tom Parker, Elvis's legendary manager, very upset because he thought that Elvis was getting sidetracked from his career, and he actually threatened to burn the books. Elvis was like extremely angry and even wanted to fire him. I don't know whether that would have been possible for him to do. So this is the untold story about Elvis, and he was a deeply spiritual individual, and he wasn't, I think he was embarrassed, frankly, by some of those movies that he made that made him, of course, a lot of money, but that were kind of goofy in a way.
Right. Well, Mike, there's somebody in the chat room. I guess they did read your book because they have a question for you here.
Okay.
They want to know, what is your source for the claim that Elvis had telepathic communications with ETs at age 8?
Well, there's a woman. Her name escapes me right at the moment, but it's in my book, who was a fan, an Elvis fan who had met him on the set of one of his movies. And she took a lie detector test, and I have the corroborating evidence in my book. So I would not say 100% that this happened, but I just the other day heard from a psychic in the Phoenix area who claimed that she dated one of Elvis's bodyguards, and this kind of corroborates with what's also with what is in the book. Having to do with it. She claims that Elvis was summoned many times to the desert and had communication with extraterrestrials, and that this was and that he would essentially sneak out of his home without the bodyguards often, and to have some kind of communication. Elvis supposedly thought that he came from that he wasn't from here, that he came from another place. And he referred to it as, may have referred to it as the Blue Star planet in the Orion constellation. I know that's sounds rather wild on the surface.
Yeah.
nonetheless, there's no question, because Larry Geller lived with him at Graceland, there's no question that he not only believed in UFOs, but that he had multiple sightings, and he felt that they were here to help us. And UFOs were seen, even Larry saw a UFO together with Elvis at Graceland. And even in more recent years, there have been UFOs sighted there.
Grant, were you an Elvis fan?
I was an Elvis fan. I actually tried to get tickets to his show one time in Vegas and wasn't able to get them. But I had a question for Mike. It's a pretty impressive list. I work with presidents, and I know how hard it is to get to presidents or any of their staff. So yeah. I guess my obvious question to you: you've got a lot of rock stars, a lot of famous type people. What's your role? How do you get to these people? How does your job tie into to these connections that you've made that enabled you to put a whole book together on this?
Yeah, well, I had heard, I was aware of the fact that there were lyrics and stuff, of course, by rock stars, many songs pertaining to UFOs and extraterrestrial visitors. But I happen to be in the public relations business, and I also happen to have ties in with show business, particularly the music business. In fact, I have been working for the past 4 or 5 years on trying to raise enough money to do the Signal of Space concerts. The idea behind the concerts are to try to make contact with extraterrestrials by beaming live music by the world's leading rock and pop stars, people on the caliber, let's say, Paul McCartney and at the time, Michael Jackson. We had talked to him, and others, to try to establish communication. And these concerts were going to were going to happen in Berlin, New York, and Tokyo. We actually had committed on paper several German businessmen from the Berlin area. One, a German newspaper publisher who came over here, and 2 guys who were partners in a big real estate company. But when the bottom fell out of the economy, they pulled out, even though they were all committed for about $2 million apiece. And that $4 or $5 million would not have been enough for us to put on the concerts, maybe one concert, but we had all kinds. It was a matter of getting our ducks in a row. We had all kinds of additional support from major corporations such as Daimler Chrysler in Germany and lots of other ones, major corporations. But unfortunately, when the economy went south, a lot of this money evaporated. We're still hoping to do it, perhaps on a smaller basis. In fact, one of the things I'm working on now is a 2012 World Survival Summit, which will have a very large UFO component and very possibly a small concert with at least one or more major rock stars here in New York City for next spring. Hello? Hello?
Oh.
Hello? Yeah.
Hello. Could you speak up a little louder and also maybe talk a little more directly to the phone? I know some people are having trouble hearing.
Sure. Okay. Is that any better?
Okay. Yeah, I think that's going to be a lot better.
Okay. Yeah.
I know some people were having trouble hearing. Oh, yes, in the chat room, they're all saying, yes, better.
Okay, great.
Okay. Which there is a story in your book that I found interesting, and it has to do with John Lennon, because there's supposed to be some kind of physical evidence that he left to someone, some type of object. Is that right?
Yes. This is a case that was related to me by Uri Geller, the Israeli psychic. Uri claims they were very close friends, Uri and John Lennon. For a while, Uri lived in New York, not far from the Dakota apartments where John and Yoko lived, and they would meet together at least once a week at the Sherry Netherlands Hotel, at Sherry Netherlands Hotel, I believe, and they would discuss subjects of mutual interest, and UFOs were one of them. Yuri claims that John gave him a small, smooth egg-shaped object that he claimed was given to him by four beings, gray beings, classic grays, inside the Dakota in his apartment. That Yoko slept through this, that there was a light through the door, almost a scene right out of Close Encounters, and that these spindly grays came in, and there was some kind of apparent telepathic communication, perhaps. And he wound up with this object, which he gave to Yuri. Now, I've been after Yuri to get it analyzed, because if in fact there's anything to it at all, it would be the ultimate evidence of UFO visitation, the ultimate physical evidence of UFO visitation to Earth. And so far, Yuri hasn't wanted to get it analyzed, but I really feel that he should. Also, peculiarly, this all happened about 3 weeks before John's assassination. Now, that was actually the second UFO event involving John. The first one he refers to on his Walls and Bridges album, and I have spoken to May Peng, his then girlfriend. They lived in another apartment building, not the Dakota, on the Upper East Side, and they had a penthouse apartment, and they saw on the roof of the penthouse apartment, right outside their window, an object, a disc-shaped object about large enough for two human-sized individuals, with lights around the rim. And John got very excited about it. When it moved away, he called the local newspapers here in New York, and he called the police department. And sure enough, there had been all kinds of quite a number of reports by other people. Yeah,
I didn't know that. So his sighting was validated, more or less.
Yes, it definitely was. In fact, I know somebody also who didn't know John Lennon, but who said that was aware of the UFOs that particular night.
Well, I know there's a resident of New York listening to us right now, and she's in the chat room, and she's wondering if you remember what year that was.
Don't remember what year, but it's probably in my book, Alien Rock, so just go to the book, and it's all in there. Okay.
And did Uri Geller give you a reason as to why he doesn't want to have it analyzed? I mean, what reason would you have not to do that?
Well, I don't think I agree with you, Angela. There's no particular reason. I mean, there's no good reason for not having it analyzed. First of all, as Uri must know, he might not want to part with the object, but such an object, the ultimate physical evidence of UFO visitation to Earth, would be of great value, worth in the millions of dollars. But putting that aside, he claims that he wants to keep it's not a good enough excuse as far as I'm concerned, but he wants to keep the mysticism surrounding it. He doesn't want to interfere with that. So that's what Uri said. I've been in touch with him a number of times trying to get him to change his mind on this. He has shown this little brass object. It's not that large. It's maybe about 2 inches tall at the most. I've been trying to get him to have it analyzed, but so far he's resisted.
It would make me a little suspicious that he doesn't want to have it analyzed.
Yeah, I must admit that me too. And then you also have to ask the question, why would John have given such an object to Uri, no matter how close they were as friends? And so I don't know the answer to that question.
Right. Do you have a question, Grant?
Yeah, another question. I guess you can go to, you have a number of big-name stars. Maybe talk about Elton John or Michael Jackson next. But the question I would have is, it's a pretty high percentage. I mean, a lot of people don't see UFOs. Have you had any thoughts about why there's such a high percentage of these type of sightings among these major rock stars? It's almost like every single one of them has had, of the big ones, have had some sort of contact. And I'm just wondering.
The big ones, yeah.
That.
Well, I don't know the exact answer to that, but my suspicion is that they were supposed to be, that they were part of some kind of a grand plan that perhaps would, I mean, Elvis. What's interesting is that Elvis, when Elvis's career was getting launched, that totally corresponds with the time when the modern day era of flying saucers and Roswell and everything else. So I think it was for something that was going to be played out in the near future, and perhaps Elvis's mission to the Mideast that he was going to attempt was part of that, and perhaps even the Signal of Space concerts that we're have been trying to get together might have been a part of that as well.
What about the rock stars that you've written about? Have they read the book? Have they commented on this whole thing about their sightings?
Yeah, some of them have. What's interesting, what's strange is that David Bowie, of all people, the one who is the kind of the ultimate spaceman among rock stars, Bowie these days, he's grown a little more conservative. So these days, I mean, he believes. I'm sorry. Hello.
Go ahead.
Hello? Yeah. These days, he believes in. He'll freely say that he believes in extraterrestrials, but he won't necessarily say that he believes that UFOs are visiting the Earth. Now, this contrasts greatly with how he was when he started off his career. And that is that he was totally over the top with the UFO alien subject. He had a library of well over 1,000 books on the subject. He even had a telescope mounted on the roof of his limousine when he was touring between concert engagements. He would go out in this limousine and go hunting for aliens.
Well, one of the arguments, that people use, and I'm seeing it come up in the chat room here, is, well, yeah, but all those rock stars were on drugs too, so maybe they were hallucinating.
Yeah, well, it's a fair question. Many rock stars, of course, have experimented with drugs, and some of them have gotten hooked on drugs even. In John Lennon's case, though, he went to extreme lengths to say that he wasn't stoned on any strange any unusual substance when he had that sighting with May Pang. I don't think, in the main, that these rock stars are seeing these things because of any drug use that they might be engaged in. The culture is more oriented, officially anyway, to alcohol and drugs, and you just can't rule out these explanations because people are let's say smoking marijuana or drinking. I mean, you'd have to rule out an awful lot of people. The thing is that their descriptions by these major rock stars of encounters with UFOs totally matches up with what hundreds of thousands of people, if not more, even millions of people, most likely, have experienced.
Right. Any of these stars, did you get to interview any of them directly?
Yes, I did. But in the and I don't want to say which ones, but I'll say this. Mostly, what I did was to interview people who were very close to the stars. They're David Bowie's first wife. People who were, in Elvis's case, his bodyguards. Larry Geller, who was his best friend, spiritual mentor. And then I wound up with, a very clear picture of what they were, what they were doing and the extent of their involvement with the UFO subjects. The big surprise to me was that this was not just a superficial, involvement or belief, but so many of them had a strong desire to make contact, and they certainly believed 100% in the reality of it.
Well, you won't tell us the ones that you got to interview directly? We're all dying to know.
Well, I'd rather not. There were not.
Just one.
I couldn't
Give us just one. Just one. You don't have to say them all. Just one.
Well, David from Van Halen was somebody who I spoke to and who got very excited about the book.
Well, was he fairly? What was his story, and was it convincing? Well,
actually, I was on his radio show here in New York, and it's a long story, but he's actually interested in being a part, perhaps, of a bringing Van Halen into a Signal of Space type of concert.
Wow, maybe I can get him on the show.
Maybe you can.
That's interesting. Grant, do you have any other questions?
Well, I'd like to hear him do some of the other ones, like especially I'd like to hear about Michael Jackson and maybe Elton John.
Okay.
Sure. Well, Michael would be the one mainly. I mean, Elton has sung about UFOs and has had a kind of tangential interest in it. He has mentioned, I do have his picture in the book, but of course he's the rocket man, so he's space-oriented. But Michael Jackson, I met Michael here in New York at a place called Abracadabra, which is a magic and costume place, a very large one in Manhattan. And Michael was totally wrapped, like from head to toe, literally. He looked like I don't know what. Frankly, he looked like a woman. It was a reddish orange outfit that he had on that totally covered him, perhaps somewhat like a burqa. And he shook hands with me. We met. It was a real rainy day. He was in the place for at least, I would say, 2 hours. So he was signing autographs and things like that. The reason he hung out so long is, number one, he's crazy about the place because it has a lot of unusual props and magic and all stuff that he loves. And but besides that, he confirmed to me his belief in UFOs when he was in his early 20s. He was flying in the cockpit of a plane over Alaska, and he saw these giant crystalline-like objects in all kinds of vibrant colors like reds and greens and yellows and oranges. And he asked the pilot what that was and whether he had ever seen it before. And he said, no, he hadn't ever seen it before. And that left Michael awestruck. He was very, very, very excited about it. Michael had a strong belief in extraterrestrials, and he even wanted to, believe it or not, perform his moonwalk on the moon. This is a story that was related to me through Uri Geller. And Uri knew Edgar Mitchell, the Apollo astronaut, the Apollo 14 astronaut, and contacted him asking to ask how Michael might accomplish that. And obviously it wouldn't be an easy proposition. And Mitchell said, well, as close as you could come at this point would be to have him go up on a Russian rocket to the International Space Station. So of course that never materialized. But Michael actually wanted to. He told me about this. He wanted to have build at one time a alien landing pad in the desert to welcome extraterrestrials to Earth and to film their arrival. And he was going to invest big money for a very high-tech setup. And then later, for whatever reasons, probably financial, I'm not sure, it never materialized. But he was very interested in the Signal Space concerts, and my plan for Michael, which I relayed to him, was to have what would have amounted to the greatest show business arrival of all time, have him come up on stage, but over the crowd in a man-made flying saucer that cost $90,000, and would land in front of the stage. And actually, the special effects, one of the special effects companies that I work with, had actually had Michael end the concert with a rocket, with a device on his back, strapped to his back, that allowed him to basically rocket off, go up like a rocket, and all the way over the crowd into the outside of the stage, all the way past the crowd, and wind up on the outside of the stadium.
So you spoke with Michael Jackson directly.
Yeah.
This is another person you interviewed directly. And did
Yes.
you try to track down that pilot that he asked what that was over Alaska?
No. That happened when Michael was in his early 20s. I didn't speak to the pilot. I don't know who that might have been.
I think that would be neat if we could find that pilot and get him to kind of confirm that story in that sighting.
Sure. Absolutely.
There's no telling how many pilots, though, Michael Jackson's had, but it must be a finite number.
Exactly. There were also UFOs that showed up at a concert at Wembley Stadium that Michael Jackson did. Now, what was very intriguing to me, in view of the fact that I've been trying to put together the Signal Space concerts, is that I found that a lot of that UFOs had shown up not only in the neighborhood of rock stars, but they also showed up at major concerts. For example, there was a UFO that was seen over the Altamont concert at the Altamont Raceway in California when the Rolling Stones were performing. UFOs were seen. Richie Havens confirmed this. UFOs were seen at the Woodstock Festival, as well as the Isle of Wight. Jimi Hendrix observed them at a rock festival and exclaimed the welcome to the shouted out, "Welcome, Space Brothers." So
wow.
They have been showing up all over, actually in many countries at concerts from time to time.
And didn't it show up at the Obama concert?
Was that a concert?
In Philadelphia? Wasn't that in Philadelphia?
They did show up in Philadelphia at a Bruce Springsteen concert, where Obama, just minutes after Obama had left the stage.
Yeah. Wow. There's a question from the chat room from Skyman, and he wants to know if you are familiar about the UFO sighting at Ozfest in it was this year, the kickoff concert. Did you know anything about that one?
Who was at that concert?
The question is, ask Mike, please, about UFO sighting at Ozfest 2010 kickoff concert.
Oh, the Ozfest. Well, I don't know about, did you say last year, or when was that?
It was 2010, so this year sometime, the kickoff concert. I'm not sure either.
I did hear, I don't know about that one specifically, but I did hear that UFOs have been seen at a Ozzy Osbourne concert here in the United States, a while ago. I don't have any more details on that, but I do have the contacts of the people who know about that.
And Grant, you wanted to know more about Elton John?
Yeah, I think he mentioned a bit, but was there anything more than what you had mentioned?
Not really too much on Elton. I mean, he wrote a song about UFOs, and I don't know that he's had any sightings himself, but he did meet with one of the astronauts who had some sightings. So I would say that he's open to the subject, but I don't know specifically about any sightings that he may have had.
Which astronaut?
Okay.
Oh, gee, I don't remember the name. Again, I refer you to the book. Remember, the book was written. The book was published about 4 years ago. So some of those details escape me, but it's in the book. It's about a few hundred pages, and there was more there than I ever thought that I would find. I couldn't have done the book, of course, without the internet. I could have done a book, but not a book that went as deep as this one did. Dan Aykroyd is very interesting because he had any number of sightings, and Dan is a real UFO activist. I mean, he once came on to the David Letterman show, and he took out of this little black bag Timothy Good's book, Above Top Secret. And Dave said, "Well, what's that?" And he said, "Well, Dave, I want you to pay attention to this. That this has pilots, testimony by pilots, and all, very solid, legitimate people about the reality of UFOs." And of course, Dave was playing games at that point and tried to, pretended that he was going to throw the book in a wastepaper basket. And Dan said, "No, you got to listen to me on this." Now, Dan, what people don't know, unless they read my book, is that the model for the Men in Black, if you will, or a takeoff of the Men in Black, were the outfits worn by the Blues Brothers, the black outfits with the skinny black ties, white shirts, and black fedoras.
I remember those, yeah.
Yeah.
Grant, I'm sorry to interrupt you a while ago. What were you going to ask?
I was going to ask, a lot of these guys, I guess, have made a few dollars off songs. Have any of them, because a lot of them, and they've got a lot of money, have any of them ever done anything to try to advance what's going on, sponsor research, look into it themselves, or something like that?
Yeah, well, the one person that stands out is Robbie Williams, the number one pop star in England. Robbie was living until recently, had a home, maybe he still owns it, in Los Angeles. And he was very much out of the closet on UFOs, and now to James Gillian's ranch in near Mount Snow in the state of Washington, where UFOs apparently are constantly seen and photographed. And he actually camped out there in Trout Lake on Gillian's property for about 2 solid weeks, photographing all kinds of UFO activity. It can be seen on James Gillian's website. Robbie's tour a few years ago, he titled the Close Encounters Tour, but it went a lot deeper than that. Robbie, actually, if there's anyone who's a point man among rock and pop stars for contact with extraterrestrials, it's Robbie Williams. He had a UFO, an unusual UFO, a small one, but which was described as sort of like a strip of light, long, narrow strip of light that came into his recording studio out in Los Angeles at the exact time that he was recording a contact song with aliens or for aliens, and zipped around inside the studio and then zipped out a window or a door. He had a number of UFO sightings, and he spent a lot of time going to UFO conventions and stuff. The press, he became so well known for his identification with UFOs that the press, started to poke fun at him, and the major part of the publicity that he was getting all revolved around UFOs. So he's taken a step or two back at the moment on this, but it would be my hope that Robbie would participate in the Signal Space concerts, or when and if we actually present them.
He was in the news a lot. I saw a lot of things on it, and I just saw recently where he was about to have a home repossessed, or it was repossessed, or something like that. I don't know. It sounded like he had some money problems too, but I was aware when he was at the ranch, and that was the Above Top Secret Forum people that took him there, and were out there with him.
Yes,
and I think he was pretty impressed with what he saw there. I would like to go there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely. If there's anything that kind of replicates from what I've heard from many people, if there's anything that kind of replicates the let's say the Devil's Tower seen from Close Encounters of the Third Kind, I would say it's that ranch. If I was interested in meeting extraterrestrials, which I am, that would be the place that I would want to go. And I have not made it out there yet, but I have even talked to James about, holding a concert out there, and he's very, very interested in it, of course. It always comes down to the question of financing.
Like so many things.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, go ahead.
You're talking about all the interests of these guys, and I've known you for a while, Mike. I've never really heard what your involvement in terms of how do you get involved, why the interest on the part of yourself.
Okay, fair enough. I just had a general interest in UFOs. It started with when I was young. I saw The Day the Earth Stood Still, and the original Day the Earth Stood Still movie left a lasting impression on me. I remember as a little kid looking at that big robot on the screen. It was like the ultimate, force, and it was, almost freaked me out. And so it started then. My interest in science fiction has always been there. And then when I I published a newspaper here in New York for a while called the New York Daily Planet, Shades of Superman, but it was a serious publication. It came out weekly. It was competing with the Village Voice, and the idea behind it was we opened up. I was looking to open up some unusual new type of departments for our news and feature coverage. So one of the things I decided to do was to open up a department, a section of the paper having to do with UFOs. I didn't know much about UFOs at all at that point. And I contacted some of the leading organizations at that time, and I was particularly interested in finding out what photographs they had. Ultimately, that led to my interest just grew and grew. It's a type of a subject that pulls you in like a emotional quicksand, pulls you in emotionally like quicksand. And I had a contract with Simon & Schuster, the same publisher who put out Alien Rock, to put out at the time of Close Encounters of the Third Kind, basically a picture book, a visual book, 50% pictures and 50% text about UFOs. Of course, today, the kind of pictures and video and everything else that we have is so much greater, but even back then, there was quite a bit of a fair amount of visual material. And I just kept on getting more and more involved with it. I've been involved with it now for a good 30 years or more. And, and it just seems to get deeper and deeper.
Have you ever had a UFO sighting of your own?
I knew that question was coming. No, my only answer to that's the same as J. Allen Hynek, the famous astronomer, who was a scientific advisor to Project Blue Book, and all the time that he did all the investigation for Project Blue Book and also on his own, he never saw a UFO. Now, in my case, I am not a great traveler. I stick pretty close to New York most of the time. There have been sightings here in New York. Muhammad Ali had a very dramatic sighting at Central Park when he was training for a fight one morning, where he saw a large craft, like a mother ship, out of which a scout ship emerged and spun around the perimeter of the park and back inside the main craft, and then the main craft just zipped off into infinity. There were trainers, and there were even some newspaper reporters who were there with Ali, and that got into the papers. I've met Muhammad. He comes at this subject from a very religious standpoint. There are references, many references to UFOs in the Black Muslim Bible, and he's had, as I say, about 22 sightings at last count. I'm sure it's up from there even. And my feeling is that perhaps the fact that he was at that time the most recognizable man on the planet has something to do with this, as did, Elvis's association with UFOs.
Well, you think that they could be, the ETs might be trying to make contact with the most famous people in order to get the word out? Is that your feeling?
I would, yes, Angela. I would definitely agree with that. I think that there is some kind of an end game that they have some kind of an end game in mind. I think the fact that, particularly at this time now that we're living in such perilous times, some people think it's the end time. My own take on that is, I'm also the founder of a new organization called the Cosmic Majority 2012, and we're going to be involved with the World 2012 World Survival Expo, which I'm planning for next spring. You'll be hearing a lot about this Cosmic Majority, CosmicMajority2012.com. It's not a website at the moment, but what I want to do is to take the televangelistic approach to steal from their style but not their substance so much, and to give oratory and to mix that in with rock music and rock stars and some gospel music as well, because that seems to be a formula that really works, and to have public, hopefully as the thing takes hold, to perhaps have public rallies and to get people to understand that whether or not they believe that December 21st, 2012 is the end of the world, as some people interpret, and probably mistakenly, the Mayan calendar. Still, there are a lot of things that are intersecting in these particular times, and so whether 2012 is the year when everything goes haywire, or whether it's now and things are certainly going haywire right this minute, or 2013, or whatever number of years we might have left, it's very apparent to me that this is not an accident, that all of these various cultures and religions all come essentially to the same conclusion. They may disagree on dates, but they all agree on the general time period. Now, I would also like to say something about the third secret of Fatima in this connection. This is something which is going to be probably the central theme, or one of the central themes, of the Cosmic Majority 2012 campaign. In 1917, there was this Fatima incident in Portugal, where 3 little shepherd kids claim that they had direct communication with the Virgin Mary, and that she gave them some secrets that they weren't supposed to reveal until they were fully grown. To back up the kids, supposedly there was to be some kind of a miracle performed in plain view of the public. What happened there in Port Spread, in that little community, was that 70,000 people from all over showed up in a large field, and they didn't know what they were going to find, what they were looking for really, but they looked up in the sky. It was a real rainy day, and they were absolutely soaked. Their clothing was soaked, the ground was soaked. They weren't having a very good time. They looked up to the sky where the sun would normally be. What they saw was from all accounts, a spinning gray-colored disc with lights coming off of the outer edges of the disc, spinning very quickly and very large. At one point, the object seemed to fall. It started to fall toward the ground. Some of the people, many of the people actually, according to the accounts, newspaper accounts, etc., and their photographs, by the way, of all these people gathered in the field, they fell down on their knees to beg forgiveness. The spinning disc retreated back up into the sky and then disappeared. But this whole thing lasted for many, many minutes. When it vanished, the people were left with dry clothes and the ground was dry. Now, the church has never released the actual third secret of Fatima, and there's a movement among Catholics, and it's reflected on the internet, having to do with the third secret of Fatima, and which has been suppressed by the church. The church did some years ago put out a statement supposedly giving what that third secret was, and had to do with Pope Paul John John Paul. And his an assassination attempt on him, which definitely took place. But there was much more than that. What it is, for my information, I'll tell you the sources too, is that there was there was deep concern on the part of the church that an object was coming toward Earth that would not strike Earth necessarily, but come close to Earth with incredible, unthinkable kinds of devastation, where hundreds of millions of people and more would be wiped out in a matter of seconds. Pope John Paul himself pretty much let the cat out of the bag to some extent. Of course, he's gone now, but because there were some pilgrims in Portugal, and he was visiting Portugal, and they asked him, Father, how come the church keeps this a secret? And he said, well, if there was something so horrendous that nothing really could be done about it, in a matter of seconds, that millions of people would vanish and die, then it would only serve the cause of it would only be sensationalistic to reveal that information. Now, there was a guy by the name of Father Malachi Martin. Father Malachi Martin passed away a few years ago. In fact, he may have been murdered, but I don't think it had to do anything with this. He was very outspoken about many things and internal things about the church. But if anyone had access to not only John Paul, but the current Pope and several of the past popes, is Malachi Martin. Now, Father Martin would go on the Art Bell show on Coast to Coast in the early days, and had been on many times. And every time he was on, practically every time, Art asked him about the Fatima incident and what he knew about the third secret. And he was mum on this. He really didn't want to discuss it because it's like one of the biggest secrets that the Catholic Church has or had. Father Martin said this. One day he let the cat out of the bag somewhat. He said that he believed, or he had information from the Pope or from the popes that there was a large incoming object that would pass Earth in this general time period. There was no year, there was no specific year given, and that it would essentially destroy most of the planet. Earth's not going anywhere, but the people on it would be, maybe not all of humanity, but a good segment of the population would be wiped out. Now, there are those who speculate, including myself, that perhaps the Bible I'm not Catholic, I'm Jewish. The Bible refers to in the Book of Revelations to wormwood, which is basically some kind of a comet that might be coming toward Earth. But there are others, including myself, who feel that perhaps this is the legendary Planet X that Zechariah Sitchin talks about, and that is headed toward Earth, and it could cause tremendous upheaval at any time, and in fact may even be responsible because of issues of gravitational pull, etc., for some of the incredibly bad weather and earth changes that we're enduring right now.
All right, with that, we've only got 1 minute left, and when we come back, we'll talk some more with Michael Lukmen. And hopefully Grant Cameron's going to stick around, because we're also going to talk about the Rockefeller Initiative in the second half of the Joyner Report. But for now, we will take about a 10-minute break. And so we'll see you back here in about 10 minutes. Go get a Coke. Go get a cup of coffee. Come back. don't forget us for the second half of the Joyner Report.
It's a god-awful small affair to the girl with the mousy hair, but her mommy is yelling no, and her daddy has told her to go, but her friend is nowhere to be seen. Now she walks through her sunken dream to the seat with the clearest view, and she's hooked to the silver screen. But the film is a sad thing for she's lived it 10 times or more. She could spit in the eyes of fools as they ask her to focus on sailors fighting in the dance hall. Oh man, look at those gay men go. It's the freakiest show. Take a look at the low man beating up the wrong guy. Oh man, wonder if you'll ever know who's in the best-selling show. Is their life on Mars? America's tortured brow that Mickey Mouse has grown up a cow. And now the workers have struck for fame, 'cause Lennon's on sale again. See the mice in their million hordes, from Ibiza to the Norfolk Broads. Rule Britannia is out of bounds, to my mother, my dog and clowns. But the
Light up your night with the Kevin Smith Show. Hi, this is Kevin Smith. Join me Monday through Friday right here on the Paranormal Radio Network.
Are you interested in a radio program that focuses on the deeper aspects of the UFO topic? Would you like to explore the facts and truths of what ufology and UFO research are all about? Then, join us here every Saturday evening at 7 p.m. Eastern on the UFO Paranormal Radio Network for Eye to the Sky, the UFO Synopsis, with your host, G. Andrew.
Hi, this is Rob Simone, and I want to tell you about my brand new show here on the Paranormal Radio Network. Each week, I bring you the most interesting people on the planet, the most in-depth discussions, and the most controversial issues. We'll go where no talk show dares to go. Join me every week for the Rob Simone Talk Show here on the UFO Paranormal Radio Network.
Hey! Hi there. Got your attention? I'm Gia Scott, and I was curious what you were doing from 7 to 9 p.m. Central Time on Tuesdays. See, I host this really interesting little radio program that airs live then, and we bring in all sorts of guests. Authors, experiencers, and everything in between. It's paranormal and guaranteed to make you go, My guest list is always up at www.giascott.com, and do tune in to the Dawn of Shades from 7 to 9 p.m. on Tuesdays.
Do you like to ask questions about everything? Would you like to escape from your proverbial box? Just leap out and explore our world in ways you've never imagined? You can have that opportunity. As we grow and expand, new features will be added, allowing you to experience radio programming at a fresh new level. I invite you to join me, November Hansen, host of Voice of the People. Together, we can expand our horizons and peer into multifaceted possibilities. This program will broadcast live Saturday evenings on the Paranormal Radio Network.
Are you a fan of the unknown? Do you constantly watch the skies, wondering if there's something out there, in fear of things going bump in the night?
Whispers Radio brings you headfirst into the world of the paranormal with the latest news and interviews with the paranormal elite.
With hosts Jordan Klein and Nick Queen, you are sure to be consumed in the world of ghosts, UFOs, cryptozoology, conspiracy theories, and the unknown. So check out Whispers Radio every Tuesday night, 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 to 7 Central. And give us a call, 1-866-514-1600. Visit us at www.whispersradio.com.
A radio program that looks at the UFO topic from a fresh perspective. Sound interesting? Then join us here on the UFO Paranormal Radio Network every Friday evening at 11 p.m. Eastern, 10 p.m. Central for The Joyner Report, hosted by journalist and researcher Angela Joyner.
The Church of Mavis with hosts Jeffrey Pritchett and Guy Weddle. 10 p.m. Central Saturdays. Opening the gates of the underworld and calling down beings of ancient starlight. Tune in, Mosh for the Apocalypse on the Paranormal Radio Network. Come to our forum at MavisIncarnate.com.
Tune in to UFO Undercover, Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern, with your host, Joe Montaldo, right here on the Paranormal Radio Network.
Good evening and welcome to this week's worldwide broadcast of The Joyner Report. Now here's your host, Angela Joyner.
Hello, and welcome back to the second half of the Joyner Report on WPRN FM New Orleans and at www.ufoparanormalradionetwork.com. The first half, we have been speaking with Mike Lukmen and Grant Camron. Mike is the author of the book Aliens Rock, and it's been very interesting. All of the music stars that feel like they've had some sort of UFO sighting or some kind of ET contact. And Grant is joining with us from Bob Emenager's house in Arkansas. He's a guest of Bob's this weekend. And Bob's a good friend of both of us. We just love him to death. And many of you know that Bob wrote a book and produced a movie about UFOs, and it involved the landing at Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico. So that's one of the things that Mike has said he would like to talk about, and Grant is an expert on that subject. So, Grant, I will turn it over to you.
Okay, first I was just downstairs with Bob, and I said, "You want to come say hello?" He said, "You say hello for me." Bob has no interest in UFOs. He never has.
He's been interviewed to death, I think.
Yeah, and he doesn't really mind. If you get him in an interview, he'll sit there and answer your questions. But it's sort of like, when I wanted to clarify some stuff, and he's like, we've been through these stories before. It's like he's been asked it so many times. But Mike was involved, and maybe I'll just answer Mike's one question that he had given me to talk to Bob about, and I asked Bob about it. And this was about the, as people know, there was a landing that took place, and the film was seen by Paul Shartle, who was the security manager at Norton Air Force Base. And Bob claimed he never saw the film, that they had the film in their possession, and that at the last minute, just before they were going to do the documentary UFOs Past, Present, and Future, Bill Coleman, who was the PR guy for Blue Book at the Pentagon, ordered the film back, and some guy got into a Datsun with his wife, and they drove the canister of film back to the Pentagon. So Bob never saw it, but Paul Shartle, who was the security manager, saw the film, and what the film purported to show was 3 UFOs coming down, one lands, high-ranking security people come onto the tarmac. They greet the aliens. They go down to a hangar down at the far end of the tarmac. And the description of the aliens they had a large nose on them. And there was always a story going around that this was the Anunnaki, that this involved Sumerians and stuff like this. So I asked Bob about this. I said, and because my impression was always that this had come from a book that Linda Howe had done, and that because Linda Howe was also offered the Holloman Air Force Base film. Now she never had possession of the film. Bob and Sandler actually had possession of the film for a substantial period of time. And so Linda put out a book, I think it was called Alien Harvest. This is back in the late 70s. And in there she dealt quite a bit with these, the drawings that had been done. And the drawings were done by I think it was a police artist had done the drawings based upon what Paul Shartle was describing these aliens looking like. So I asked Bob, and he said, it looked like Babylonians coming back. And I said, but the whole thing about the Sumerians and the Anunnaki, says, did that come from you? He said, no, it didn't come from me. He said, we never talked about that. And so I said, well, Linda, and he said, I don't know. I mean, he'd heard the story, but he said, it definitely didn't come from us. We didn't mention this thing. And he mentioned the fact that, a police artist, and that, you're just sort of guessing when you got a police artist. It's not exactly, it's the best description that Paul Shartle could do. So that's basically what I can confirm from Bob, that Bob just said they didn't see it. They had these large noses, or like a face mask or whatever they were wearing. And he really didn't know much more than that, what Shartle had. All he knew was what Shartle had told him, was what Shartle told everybody else.
Yeah. Well, okay, but the thing is that what's important here is that this image of the alien, I found the image in the book is an exact copy, and I mean literally a copy, 100% of the being with a large nose, of a statue of a Sumerian god, a photograph of a statue of a Sumerian god in a museum in, I believe, in London.
Wow.
And so it, you know, the question is that whether this landing actually took place and was filmed, or whether it was, as I feel, whether it was a case of a training film being made to test the public reaction to a real alien landing. The Anunnaki model, that is, the beings from Planet X, were used for this. And I don't think that it's responsible for Bob to just, you know, try to, you know, blame the artist, or even to claim that the artist couldn't have, you know, Bob. Okay, I believe that he didn't see the film, fine, but still the whole idea was to convey in these drawings what the beings might look like, and they turn out to be exactly the Anunnaki, and that's what's in his book, and that's what is in the film documentary that he made that reports on the case. They never actually used the film. Supposedly they used maybe 30 seconds of the UFO up in the sky, and all you see is a light, and what that is exactly, it's very hard to figure out. It could be even could have been an airplane on that particular piece of footage, but I think that Bob really has to, you know, zero in on this in a more responsible way, and because my question for Bob is might the government be aware, as I feel that they are, about the existence of the Anunnaki and Planet X? And it becomes even more important to get the answer to that question since according to what I've heard about the third secret of Fatima, that Planet X or something close to it, some kind of an object, huge object from outer space coming toward Earth, could wipe out most of the human race. Moreover,
okay, Mike, I'm sorry to interrupt. Could you speak up a little bit again?
Yeah, sure. Moreover, the existence of the Anunnaki, if in fact they're real, and Sitchin has written well over 12 books and that have been published around the world, even in China. It just comes right down to the question of human origins, and were we created in test tubes? Did the Anunnaki come down here as Sitchin alleges, and I believe that he's right, and do experiments to produce really what were slaves, that is a slave race, when they did it, to mine for gold, because they needed gold to cover their atmosphere, because instead of having an external sun like we do, they're so far out on the outer edge of the solar system that they supposedly have an internal source of heat and light, and that they had to keep this in, and they needed gold for that purpose, so they came down here and lived here for very, very long periods of time, and there's even information about how long they lived, which was easily hundreds and hundreds of years and longer, and they had everything to do with creating much of our modern day culture. I mean, things like law and music and dance and art and all kinds of things came, not art, but all kinds of things came from the Anunnaki. Now, where of all places did the Anunnaki land? Well, the ancient city of Samaria is located in northern Iraq. And
Mike, I'm wondering here, what do you feel that Bob Emenegger is being irresponsible about?
I think that he needs to explain why he decided to go with an illustration which is an exact duplicate of an Anunnaki of an Anunnaki statue. It's not just a police sketch, but it's a tracing, literally a tracing. I can prove it. It's a tracing of the photograph in the London Museum of an Anunnaki statue. So
you're saying it's not a police sketch. It is actually tracing of another artist's conception of the Anunnaki?
It's a tracing of a Sumerian artist's sculpture of an Anunnaki, a photograph of a Sumerian artist's sculpture of an Anunnaki.
Okay, so Grant, what were you told that Shartle described the beings to a police sketch officer?
Yeah, because as you know, they had the film, and then Coleman called the film back, and Bob just described this a number of times. They were sort of like, well, what the heck are we going to do now? We don't have the film. We're going to have to go with drawings. And this, I think it's 8 seconds of film. This thing. Bob has always been hesitant to talk about that. He describes it as being given background. Now, if this thing isn't a direct tracing, Mike,
100%.
Okay, if you can get me the thing, I'll show it to him. I'm still here till tomorrow noon. I'll show it to him, and we've got the book here, and I'll ask him. I mean, this is the first time I've heard this. That he's always told the story that they had to bring in someone to do drawings because they didn't have the film anymore.
Yeah, and he told Antonio Gineas, who's now with Open Minds magazine, as you know, who's a close friend of mine and helped me with the put together the Alien Rock book. He told him, I had asked Antonio some years ago who's going to be seeing Bob Emenegger, and I asked, the question of the same question that I posed here, and Antonio said that Bob claimed that a Brazilian artist, and I don't know whether that person was a police artist or not, but a Brazilian artist had made the sketches, and he sort of tried to distance himself a little from to explain why that the image came out the way it was. But now all of this happened during the Richard Nixon administration, and H.R. Haldeman of Nixon's chief of staff was entertained Bob at the White House, or met with Bob at the White House, discussing the release of the film. And here's a person, H.R. Haldeman from Watergate infamy, who said that the government, he was aware, and presumably the government was aware, and possibly, this is my speculation now, President Nixon was aware of the existence of this film. I don't think it's accidental that the film was offered not once but twice, once to Bob, and then some years later to Linda Howe under similar circumstances. This is probably, for my money, one of the most important cases, together with the third secret of Fatima and the Fatima UFO incident, and perhaps the let's say the Bentwaters landing in Roswell. I mean, this is like an extremely important case.
Oh, I'd agree. I've always said it's potentially the most important case in ufology because it's a case where there's really not a lot of disinformation, in fact, really almost none. Let me clear up the Holloman story. The Holloman, Bob went to school with Holloman. They were in the same fraternity at UCLA. Holloman was about a year older, 2 years older, Bob told me. He knew him fairly well. And after this whole incident had occurred, he wasn't at the White House. He met Holloman. He told me where it was, but it wasn't at the White House. And ran into him and said, "Oh, have you ever heard about the landing of an alien craft at Holloman Air Force Base?" And and Holloman said, "Yeah, I may have heard something about it." And so that was the extent of that. But there's no doubt. I mean, I've talked to Bob, and I've got probably every interview he's done back to 1994 when he started to lecture about it. He's very. If you've met his wife, his wife is into everything. The Anunnaki thing, she'll talk at length about how this probably fits in, all this sort of stuff. And then you'll just hear Bob go, "Oh, Margaret." I mean, he just absolutely does not care about the subject at all. I mean, he's sitting downstairs right now watching TV. there was a couple of, I told Angela, there was a couple of incidents that occurred that I talked to Bob, and he confirmed one of them to me tonight. There's actually two. Bob's story, the more you hear it, and it's not that he's evading things, he'll answer the question if you ask him the direct question. But there's so many questions that people really don't ask him, and so he really doesn't talk about it. He only answers the questions people ask.
Yeah.
The one thing I think you probably are familiar, or your listeners are familiar, he goes to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base when they're doing this documentary in 1994, and they deal with Colonel Weinbrenner, who was the head of foreign technology at Wright-Patterson at the time. And he asked me, and he said, I walked right into the room, and Sandler was with him, and he walked up and he said, Colonel, can you tell me about the landing of the alien craft at Holloman Air Force Base? And then Weinbrenner gets up and starts drawing MiG-23s on the blackboard, and Emenegger's wondering, like, well, maybe he didn't hear me, he didn't hear my question, and it was just, he said it was like just unreal what was going on here. He was talking about something else, and then he goes, as he's talking, he goes to the bookshelf, and he pulls a book out, and Emenegger's sitting down, and he gives him the book, and Emenegger opens it up, and it says, to my good friend, Colonel Weinbrenner, J. Allen Hynek, and it's one of Hynek's UFO books. Yeah. And then you go, well, now I sort of figure out what's going on. So that ends. He goes, Weinbrenner just died. We looked it up. Bob and I looked it up today. I think it was March of this year. Bob gets a phone call, and I said, did you get the guy's name? And he said, yeah, I got the guy's name. And a guy phones him. He says, I've been trying to find you. I have a message for you. My wife was the nurse, and Weinbrenner lived in Houston. He died in Houston, and this woman was the nurse that took care of him when he was dying. And Weinbrenner said, I've got a message. You got to get a message to Bob Emenegger. And the message was simply, there are 5 aliens. We've got 5 aliens in Utah. And so the guy said, this is all I've got. This is the message I got. And this is what my wife, I don't know why Bob didn't know why the wife wasn't talking about it. She couldn't speak English well or whatever it was. But this husband phones and says, this is what my wife was told, and she was the nurse. That was the one thing. The other thing that was kind of dramatic, and Bob really didn't, again, it's like, they're talking about music and art and stuff like this, and we really didn't talk about UFOs again. Been here for a couple of days, but...
Let me interrupt for a second. So this, is this the new information about the nurse in Houston that said to get Bob this message?
Yeah, that's one of the items that I got.
Well, that is pretty compelling. Okay.
Yeah.
Because they're saying
the other thing that I had, and five. Well, we've got 5 aliens in Utah. Simple message. And he insisted that this nurse get this to Bob Emenegger. And he hasn't seen Bob Emenegger met him one time. This would be back in 1974, went into his bunker underground at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. It's the only time he's ever met him. Oh, no, he did. No, he told me he met him a couple times. He went down to Houston, and they have an old folks thing where all the old high-ranking Air Force military people hang out. And he met him there, and I said, well, did you talk about UFOs? He said, no, and he's talking about war stories, old war stories. And they didn't talk about UFOs. So Bob sort of had known him, but never brought up the subject of UFOs again. And I can understand it, because Bob really is not that interested in UFOs.
Grant, Grant, I just wanted to say that have you ever heard of course, Bob was head of Gray Advertising at that time.
No, he was head of one of the departments. He wasn't the head of Gray Advertising in Los Angeles. He was the head of I can't think of the department. He was vice president, but he was the head of a department of creative writing or creative something, and basically did commercials for them.
I see. At Gray or for Gray?
For Gray in Los Angeles, and there are a number of, like in New York. I think the head office is in New York. So he was.
I mean, there were rumors too that the Gray Advertising had CIA ties.
It was a front. That was the rumor. It was a front for CIA's. I've never asked him about that because the whole thing was it all went through Sandler's studio. And Sandler was the connection. No doubt about it. Sandler was the intelligence connection. In fact, his wife said to me today, Sandler was just a guy who was very good at putting things together. He wasn't really interested in UFOs either. They just got this offer. They were brought in on a bunch of Navy contracts at Norton, and one of the things that they said at the end was, we'd like you to do this UFO thing. They were going to do the dog thing and all these other DARPA advanced projects because they wanted publicity. So because Bob was called in because he was doing commercials and stuff, but it was Sandler who his wife described today. He was the type of guy who you could give in the morning, you give him a stick and a piece of gum, and by the evening time, he'd made a pile of money with it. He was able to. He had no lack of self-confidence. And Bob told me, for example, today that at Sandler's studio, during the production of this whole documentary, there was a CIA guy there all the time, and he didn't tell him what to do. He didn't do anything. He was just sort of there all the time. But this is the kind of thing that I think it was more the Sandler thing, that Sandler would make the connections. They talked about this one abduction case they did, I think it was in 79, where they needed some hypnosis people, and about 10 minutes later Sandler says, okay, I've got it. And he said, what do you mean? I've got two guys, and they were psychologists who worked for the CIA who were going to do these abductions. So Sandler was the guy who was the sort of the same as Bill Moore. His guy was Chandray, who had an intelligence background, and so you had a front guy who was, and that was even his wife will describe that Sandler was the guy that was running the thing, and Bob was the guy who did all the work and was the guy who could put it all together, and that's why these two guys worked as a team. But the other interesting thing that I had, and I had always, when you study his case, the more you study it and then you ask questions, and it sort of comes out that you were right all along. You can sort of start to calculate things. Bob's production was done in 73, 74, and then you have, he talked numerous times about working with Spielberg's sister, Annie, and they worked on a number of projects, and Angela knows because she's got his resume. I mean, he didn't just do UFO stuff. He did one UFO thing. He did piles of documentaries and piles of science fiction movies, and a lot of these science fiction movies were done with Spielberg's sister. So because Close Encounters of the Third Kind is basically the same scenario, I said to him, I said, well, one of the theories is, and I've heard it, and I said, tell me what you think. Your thing is done in 1974, and it's basically a planned landing, and here 4 or 5 years later, Spielberg comes out with basically the same thing. You change the location, you do all this sort of stuff, but it's basically the same story. And he said, yeah, he says, and this I'd heard for the first time today. He says, yeah, he says, Alan came and told me that. Now, he didn't tell me that till about a year or two ago.
And just so people know, Alan is Alan Sandler, Bob's partner. I think people are getting a little lost. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah. Who worked on the project with him. And he had a studio in Los Angeles, and they produced this at his studio. And they produced a lot of other stuff, not just this. They produced all sorts of films, documentaries, and stuff like this on all sorts of different subjects. And so he said, yeah, Alan told me, but he didn't tell me till about a year or two ago that Steven Spielberg had picked up a copy of our documentary after we did it for review, and that Spielberg's mother had told Bob, you know, Steven's version was better than yours, or his documentary, his version or his stories were better than your stories. So he knew the Spielberg family, but Steven Spielberg had actually borrowed or gotten a copy of the documentary, and 4 years later he produces basically the same scenario in a film which has this controlled landing where it's all arranged, the UFOs are coming down, and everybody's prepared, and you have Hynek there and valet and stuff. So it was very interesting. It was something that I had always thought might be a possibility, and then he confirms to me today, that Spielberg did get a copy of your documentary.
Grant, I know that you know this story very well, and probably Mike does too, but okay, just so that we're clear, there were people asking questions. Now, Spielberg watched Sandler and Emenager's UFOs past, present, and future, and then 4 years later came up with his own film, which was what?
Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Close Encounters of the Third Kind. So are you saying that he watched this film and that spurred him on to make Close Encounters?
Well, the possibility is there. I mean, I had looked at it and then asked Bob, is this a possibility? And he said, well, yeah, he actually got the film. So it's a controlled landing. People have to understand what happened with Emenager was they were contacted by Alan came to Bob and said, we got to go to Norton. And Bob had served in Air Force at Norton for 11 months, just after he came out of university. So Bob knew Norton very well. And they were approached by Paul Shartle, who was the head of security at Norton Air Force Base, and he said that we want you to do these different films. And they were all for the Navy and trying to increase the likability of the military and do these different things on holography and using animals in like dolphins and stuff like this. And then at the very end they said, oh, and by the way, we'd like you to do a documentary on UFOs, and what would you think if we said that we had a film of a landing at Holloman Air Force Base where UFOs landed? And Bob was like he is now, he's like sort of skeptical and said like, come on. And he said, okay, well, we'll do it. And they get dragged into this whole thing where they go from place to place. They actually meet like with Arthur Lundahl, who was the guy who ran the photographic lab for the CIA in Washington for the U-2, the SR-71. They're told about this story where a UFO flies by a window in Washington. All the Blue Book people are totally helping them out, giving them whatever they want. And Bob's always said there was no cover-up. This is the way it is. I can't believe there's this cover-up going on. Everybody cooperated with us, and it does seem like everybody cooperated. And he asked Bill Coleman, who was sort of the head of this thing, when they went to the Pentagon. They went into the Pentagon. They didn't have to sign in at the Pentagon. They walked right into the Pentagon without signing in. They were told that when they got into the Pentagon, you're going to ruin this thing. It's going to make the phone ring. And Sandler told them, you called us here. What are you talking about? They met with Bill Coleman, who was at that time was the PR spokesman for Blue Book. And it was Coleman who was behind it. They actually signed an agreement. They signed a contract. And he said it was very businesslike. There's none of this. He was talking about Bill Moore today. It was none of this, we're going to go to a hotel room and look at film or whatever. It was very clear-cut. This is what you're going to do. This is what we're going to do. And they were given the Holloman Air Force Base film. And at the very end, this film was pulled back. And what the Holloman Air Force Base film was a film that purported to show, and Bob said it happened in 1971, UFOs landing at Holloman Air Force Base, this whole thing, and that they were actually on the base. They used their contact, who was a Major Verona, who actually got them onto the base. And Bob knew the whole story, what had happened before he got on, so I'm sure Charlotte told him the whole story. And they went to the hangar. They helped to open up the hangar. They did all the filming at Holloman Air Force Base. And the whole thing was, at the very end, this film was pulled, and that's where Bob said when the film was pulled, they were forced to go and use animations to tell the story. And the way it was described is this might have happened, or it may happen in the future. And it sort of describes this landing. And there's been stories that various presidents have seen this film. It's part of the presidential briefing. And so that's the whole story of who Bob Eneberger is and why this is so important is that it does appear that the majority of the stuff that's in the films that they've got is not disinformation. You can actually have Blue Book people talking on there. And he asked, when I suggested, he phoned Coleman. In fact, Coleman phoned here today. I heard the phone message. They're very good friends. And he talked to Bill Coleman, and he said, why did you cooperate with us? Why did everybody go along with us on this project? And Coleman told him, when the Secretary of the Air Force tells you to do something, you do it.
So he was ordered to go along with them. And I remember that when I first met Bob Emenager, we were at the X-Con in 2008, and he was like, I just don't understand all these people running around here about cover-ups and they don't get any cooperation and they can't get FOIAs released because he said it was exactly opposite for he and Sandler, that they had all kinds of cooperation for this movie, and it was very easy for them to get into the Pentagon. Like you said, they didn't even sign in, and it was a really interesting story. But I was just wondering, back to the aliens or the live aliens or whatever in Utah, where would they have been kept in Utah? What Air Force base or what?
Well, there's a story about George Air Force Base or whatever it is. There's some, Greer always talks about the fact that they moved everything out of Area 51 down to Utah, and because it's run by Mormons and they're more controlled or whatever the story is. So there's that, but basically that's the way Bob tells the story. I mean, that's the story. He got a message, we have 5 aliens in Utah. And that was the message that Weinbrenner on his deathbed gave to this nurse, and it had to get to Bob Emenegger.
Do we know what the nurse's name was?
Bob knows who the nurse is, yeah.
Well,
I didn't get it from him, but he knows.
Is she still living?
Yep. This just happened. This has only happened about a month or 2 months ago. Because Weinbrenner just died. No, the nurse, it was the husband called. But when I asked him this afternoon, yeah, and I don't know why, even Bob wasn't too sure why the wife didn't phone. But I said, we looked it up. We were sitting on the internet this afternoon looking up when Weinbrenner died, and he said, oh, this just happened a couple months ago. So, I mean, he died in March, and it sounded like it was maybe no more than 2 or 3 months ago that this phone call came to Bob. And you know Bob, it's like he thinks 90% of us are totally whacked. When he goes to Ozark Conference, he goes to listen to Linda Howe, and then he walks out. He and his wife is in all the lectures, and he stands in the hall. He has no interest in the subject at all.
So, Grant, does that mean that aliens could still be in Utah right now? I mean, this is recent, and the man was on his deathbed.
Well, but the thing is, we looked at when he left this afternoon. Bob and I were working on it. He left the Air Force in '75. So he may have only been giving out information that he knew as of 75. Whether they're going to continue to tell him what's going on a top secret program after he leaves the military. He left the military in 75. So this may have been what he knew as of 1975. But the important part was that Bob had gone into his bunker in 1974 and said, what about this landing? And he played this game like nothing was going on. Or he did mention this thing about, we got this crazy Mexican guy here. And I can't remember what the guy's name was, but
Alfonso.
This is at Wright-Patterson. There was a guy there who was talking about aliens, underground stuff. Robert Collins always refers to him. But he said, we got this crazy Mexican guy here who thinks we got aliens underground here at Wright-Patterson. But he was poo-pooing the thing in 74. So that's what's significant about this whole thing is he really doesn't talk to him from 74 to 2010. And suddenly after he dies, Bill gets this message from supposedly this nurse who's got the names and stuff that says, this is a message from Emenegger on his deathbed. He wanted you to know we have 5 aliens in Utah. And there was no description of whether they're alive or dead.
Oh, I want to talk to that nurse.
Yeah, well, he talked to Bob. You know Bob. He'll tell you. I mean, Bob really he thinks we're kind of all chasing shadows, and that a lot of it's a waste of time, and he's not really that interested. But you know what he's like, and he'll fill you in with what he knows and try to help you.
It's hard for me to believe, and I don't know, Mike. You kind of touched on it earlier. You said, well, maybe they didn't see the film, but it's hard for me to believe that this was a piece of film that they were planning on using in their production, and nobody watched it. I mean, wouldn't you think at least one of them would have watched the film?
Absolutely. I mean, unless I can't conceive that they would have possession of the film and not watch it or not be allowed to watch it.
Well, Shuttle watched it, but Bob, I can see Bob, like Bob and Sandler really weren't interested in the thing. They did describe the one, and Angela and I pushed on this story to try to get it. They've still got a film. They've still got a top secret film.
I once showed Zechariah Sitchin the drawing from in the book in Bob's book present and future UFOs. And I also showed him the overlay, how that came from a statue. Sitchin did an absolute double take. Also, Cinema Fantastique magazine, which is a general magazine, a film magazine, had done a spread of photographs of various alien models and spaceship models that were used by Steven Spielberg in making Close Encounters of the Third Kind. It included some sculptures of aliens that had been commissioned by Spielberg from different artists and different groups that weren't used when it came right down to it. What's interesting is that there's a photograph. I remember at least one photograph of a alien model of a head, and it looked quite much in the ballpark of a classic Anunnaki.
Mm-hmm. Since you brought up the Close Encounters movie again, we have a question in the chat room from Lillian, and she wants to know if either of you have evidence that supports that last scene in Close Encounters where they're in the orange jumpsuits and going off world, if that is a real life scenario, if either one of you have any inside information on that.
Well, I'm not aware of that, but what's interesting, though, is that Close Encounters of the Third Kind, that finale scene, of course, the communication when the mothership touches down is done through music. And this is one of the things that gave me the idea for the Signal Space concerts, to communicate using music, just as Spielberg presented in Close Encounters.
What about you, Grant? Do you know anything about it?
Well, I think we may be going to make an implication here to Serpo. I think that works the other way around. I think what Spielberg did, and he's got to protect himself as from getting sued and stealing people's ideas, is, I mean, he was familiar. He's fascinated with UFOs. He's familiar with abductions. He's familiar with this kind of stuff. And he has Bob's idea about the controlled landing. And he's basically just weaving stuff into a fictional movie. It may have something that he's read that is purported to be true. He makes it into sort of fiction. But I think the idea of this exchange thing is now coming back, but I think it's the people who are making up the Serpo stuff have sort of turned it around and based it upon the Steven Spielberg movie, and I think that stuff's on the up.
I asked J. Allen Hynek at a conference in Brewster, New York. If you recall, there was many years ago when Hynek was alive, there was sightings by thousands of people, including, I believe, the mayor and the police chief, and up in upstate New York, of a very, very, very large craft, probably approximating something the size of what was seen, the Phoenix, the so-called Phoenix Lights. And I asked, my first question for Hynek was, I had never met him before at this conference, until this conference, and my first question for him was, did he know anything, or did he put any stock in the Roswell UFO crash? And this was still pretty early on in the UFO movement, and he was not prepared to say too much on about Roswell. My second question for him had to do with Spielberg and Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and whether the government, as it had been rumored, was behind, had engineered the Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Whether that was deliberately being put forth, perhaps as a way to prepare the public slowly for the reality of contact with extraterrestrials. Hynek, if you can picture this, went running down the hall away from me, and I never saw him again. Just off into the sunset.
Well, Grant, now I know you were just at the Clinton Library in Little Rock, and there were some documents released to you about that involved Spielberg. Was there any smoking gun information there? No,
they know how to do it. I mean, anything that's extremely sensitive is dealt with outside of letters. Basically, you have like congratulations on your Academy Award or a letter on happy birthday. There's a little bit of discussion about Spielberg gave the president a famous painting that was in the set in the White House with the Statue of Liberty. There's stuff like that, but really nothing. And a lot of the stuff was held back on what do you call it? The B6, the personal exemption. But there was, and as I told you, basically I just sat there, and when it came to the Spielberg file, I just photographed everything. So I just photographed, and a lot of the stuff I really haven't read yet because I just got out of there yesterday. But I do know that in the logs of the president, they were together an awful lot. He was actually running business out of Spielberg's place in New York. Because he'd stay there for, I think, a day or 2 days, and the president keeps working even when he's on holidays, and you'd have a meeting with, or a conference call with a bunch of generals and stuff like this, and this is all taking place at Spielberg's house. And Spielberg's wife and Hillary were good friends too, so there was a lot of contact there. But I've heard Spielberg talk about the fact that he's talked to numerous presidents, and none of them had any confirmation that they had anything for real. And I would say, based upon 3 days at the Clinton White House, unless I'm getting walked around, I really don't think Clinton really had that much insight as to what was going on. You could tell he was trying.
Didn't Ronald Reagan, though? There was a report that Ronald Reagan had seen Close Encounters in a private screening at the White House, and there was a
that was E.T. That was. And Spielberg told the story to Jamie Chandray, who was this intelligence guy who was working with, he was a movie guy, but he had an intelligence background working with Bill Moore. And he also told that it had confirmed there was another high-ranking director in Hollywood who was told the story. They wouldn't tell me who the guy's name was. They said, if we told you who it was, you'd know who it is. And apparently he heard Spielberg told the story. What it was he brought Reagan wanted to watch movies, so they go to the White House movie thing. Spielberg takes E.T., the extraterrestrial, there, and they're going through the whole movie. And near the end of the movie, Reagan is sitting right beside Spielberg, and he leans over and he says, "I bet you there aren't 6 people in this whole room know how true this whole thing is." And Spielberg,
that proves that the presidents were that at least Reagan was in on this.
Sure, but he
and quite a few others.
But has
Spielberg claims to have been very surprised.
Has he ever confirmed that conversation, Grant?
Billy Cox tried to get him to confirm it. He talked to his PR guy. I wrote immediately, and they said I sent money so that they could give me the mail back, the stamp and stuff to force them to answer. And they did answer, and basically said he was in Africa doing one of the movies in Africa or whatever, and can't address your question. Robbie Graham out of England tried to get to him. Everybody's tried to get him to answer this specific question of what Reagan said to him. No, he is not. And the only thing the closest we got was Billy Cox when he was at USA Today, talked to his publicist, who said Steven Spielberg is not going to comment on private conversations that occurred with the president.
Well, we know that, or in one of my interviews with James Fox, he told us that Steven Spielberg had watched his movie, I Know What I Saw, and he was actually in receipt of a letter from Spielberg that was sent to a mutual friend, and he had been trying to go through Spielberg's publicist to be able to release the contents of that letter and hasn't been able to get it done. So it seems like Spielberg is kind of a dead end when it comes to things like that.
The expert on Spielberg is Robbie Graham, and he's working. I think he's working towards his PhD, and he's doing this whole Hollywood UFO connection. He's just provided. I think I gave it to you, Angela. He's provided me with his latest paper, which was published, and it should be on my website. I asked Paul to put it up on the website, and it's the whole story of Steven Spielberg, and he's got a lot of stuff that even I hadn't seen, and it goes right back to the beginning, the Steven Spielberg UFO connection, and he wrote a paper, and it's 15 pages long on this whole issue, and it should be on presidentialufo.com. If you go there, the paper should be there. It just went up in the last couple of days.
Okay, we've got about 5 minutes left, so what do you guys want to cover? We want 5 minutes long.
I think the Rockefeller thing would be, and Hillary Clinton's involvement, Bill and Hillary Clinton's involvement is important.
Okay.
Basically, Bill and Hillary Clinton were entertained by Rockefeller at his JY Ranch in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and at the time, Rockefeller he had a captive audience with them because he was giving a substantial, even though he's a Republican, was giving a substantial donation to Bill Clinton's reelection campaign. Rockefeller gave them copies of the report, the best available evidence of UFOs, that contained formerly secret documents released on the FOIA. It included, most importantly, the accounts of nuclear weapons, UFOs going to nuclear weapons storage areas, and in some cases actually tampering with them. I don't think for any negative reason, but rather out of curiosity and concern that we don't blow ourselves up or the whole planet. Because of national security, and particularly in these times of terrorism, I don't think that Bill and Hillary Clinton can wash their hands of this crucial issue. Hillary actually she was up early the next morning and told Rockefeller, and this takes some incredible nerve, but told Rockefeller that not to bring the subject up again of UFOs, even though she can be seen in a photograph on Grant's website with a UFO book in her arms, walking through Rockefeller's ranch side by side with Rockefeller. Rockefeller, didn't just have this initiative. I mean, he did have an initiative, but the initiative was much more than the release of the report. The initiative to about 1,000 movers and shakers on the world scene. The initiative had to do with actually having a UFO conference at his ranch. It had to do with his financially sponsoring a meeting or meetings out in California with former military intelligence officers and people who worked in the Pentagon in the 1960s and 70s who were prepared to blow the whistle on Roswell, providing they were granted presidential immunity. So there was a lot going on with Rockefeller, and I think that it's really important that we hold the Clintons responsible, and Hillary Clinton particularly at this point, for her involvement with Rockefeller over the UFO issue. Rockefeller's lawyer prepared, Henry Diamond prepared for Hillary a draft of essentially a briefing paper that Hillary was supposed to edit and then give over to Bill. Bill these days says that he's convinced that nothing happened, of an extraterrestrial nature in Roswell, but he was very, very, very involved with Roswell. He made public statements about Roswell and had the Air Force report in the Oval Office, and they just can't walk away from this. As I say, there is a question of national security involved, and if that's what it takes to get them to take a stand, hopefully a positive stand on UFOs, I think it's important that we hold their feet to the fire and get this out in the open.
Well, this question is for Grant. I've just sort of been wondering, isn't it possible that the Clintons were just trying to entertain an old guy to get his donations, to get his money, to kind of appease him? Okay, let's listen to him about these crazy UFO stories and all of this stuff, and so he'll keep donating to our cause. I mean, what do you think?
Well, part of that was true. I mean, they had no choice. And if you look at the Rockefeller documents, you'll see quite clearly that every time they decided they weren't going to play a game, Rockefeller said, okay, I think it's time to go to the president. And they'd say, okay, hang on. And then they'd try to answer his questions, and because he wanted all the amnesty for all the witnesses at Roswell. And every time they stalled, he would say, okay, I think it's time to go to the president. And they were scared of him because he said, if this doesn't get done, He says, what I can do is I can put a one-page ad in every major newspaper in the country. And they were petrified. This guy had a lot of money and a lot of power, so they did what they could. But Bill has openly stated, he talked about UFOs openly in Hong Kong in 2005 when Paul Davids, the guy who was the producer of the movie Roswell, met him at a fundraiser in the Hamptons. Bill looked at the Roswell book. He brought him the newest Roswell book, and he said Bill looked down at the book and said, "I'm fascinated in this kind of stuff." We know that Hillary approached William LaParle through a second party. We know she approached Daryl Sims, an abduction researcher, through a second party. They were fascinated. They were trying to get material. And the Rockefeller thing, sure, they were trying to make this guy happy because this was a powerful guy who could do them a lot of damage, and he was a good friend of theirs. And they really didn't want it because they knew this is a radioactive subject. This is not something they want to go public with. They don't want to deal with it. They know the problems, but they still want to find out the answers. So sure, they were trying to make them happy, no doubt about it.
All right, and with that, we're out of time. I appreciate you, Mike Lukmen, and also you, Grant Camron. Thank you for being with us on the Joyner Report tonight. Hopefully, next week, Grant Camron will be back with me, and I'm going to try to get Stephen Greer on again. We have some new information we'd like to cover. So, thank you, and good night, and we'll see you next Friday night.
Thanks.